Welcome everyone to the Private Equity Club chat. My name is Jordan Blitzer. I'm from the admissions team. I'm here in the background just helping to facilitate this webinar for you, but the stars of our show are the two students who you can see, and I'm going to kick it over to them to get this going. But before I do, just want to remind everyone this is an interactive live chat. So please do utilize the Q&A box to connect with these students and ask them the questions that you have, what's on your mind about the Private Equity Club, about Columbia. They are going to be great resources for you, and they will answer those questions live as they receive them. So let me ping it over to Ame.
Thanks, Jordan, and welcome everybody. I remember being in your shoes a couple of years ago, so I'm really excited to speak with you guys and answer any questions that I can. And my co-president of the Private Equity Club is Julia Dean, and we'll both introduce ourselves on the next slide. But this is just a quick agenda of the session. We're going to introduce ourselves. We'll talk really quickly about the PE Club and what we are, what we do, and then we'll kick it over to you for any questions and answers. So with that, we'll move on to introductions. I can quickly introduce myself. I grew up in Mumbai in India. I moved to the US for college, went to UVA, worked in investment banking at Citi in the industrials group here in New York, and then went down to DC to work at IFC, which is the private investment arm of the World Bank. So I was doing emerging market PE, focusing mostly on infrastructure and energy. Over this summer, between my first and second years, I was doing infra PE at OMERS, which is a Canadian pension fund. And post MBA, I'm still trying to figure out exactly where I'm going, but I want to be in New York in a PE role. And fun fact, I've been in the live audience for 3 late night talk show hosts in New York, Seth Meyers, Stephen Colbert, and John Oliver. So big fan of all of those guys. And I'll kick it over to Julia now to introduce herself.
Thanks, Ame. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia. Really excited to have you all here today. I was born and raised in New York City. Before coming to Columbia, I worked in investment banking, and then for 2 years in investment banking at Credit Suisse in New York City, and then went to a middle market private equity firm in Boston for 2 years. Post MBA, I'm looking to actually move to Colorado, so I'm looking for a role there. I did spend my summer here, and I'm currently in Colorado right now, working at a part-time internship in a private equity firm here. My fun fact is that this summer, while I was in Colorado, I hiked a 14er, which is a big deal in Colorado. It's a mountain with 14,000 foot elevation. So, immersing myself as a city person coming to the West. All right, happy to chat about the Private Equity Club. That's why you're all here. The goal of the Private Equity Club is, to begin, we are one of the largest student-run clubs at CBS. We have more than 700 members this year, as well as 45 officers, and we host one of the largest student-run conferences at Columbia. So there are a lot of opportunities within the Private Equity Club for you all to become involved, and that goes straight into the purpose. Ame, if you want to go through the purpose of the club.
Sure. So there's sort of 3 things that we try to facilitate in the club. One is to educate our members about the industry and help prepare them for interviews or careers, or even ancillary support functions like consulting or banking or other sort of functions within the private equity universe. So that's the first one, is education. The second one is careers. So we have a dedicated careers team which sort of reaches out to employers and advertises opportunities for both internships, summer as well as in semester, as well as full-time opportunities to our members. So that's our second function. And the final one is social, just to make sure that we get to interact with each other and form this network that we can sort of develop at school and then rely on as we go on in the private equity industry once we graduate. So those are sort of the 3 functions. We do so beyond this, of course, as Julia mentioned, we have a conference that we typically do in January or February every year. And so that's to facilitate interaction between our members as well as alumni and industry specialists who can come and speak to us about how the industry is doing and what they're seeing specifically in various parts of the private equity universe. Did I miss anything, Julia?
You very much got it. One thing I would emphasize, and everyone hopefully joined this chat because you at least have some interest in private equity, but the club is certainly not for, only people who have experience or only those people who know that they want a career in private equity. As I mentioned, we have 700 members and they come from all different backgrounds, with all of them seeking to get something a little bit different out of their club experience. So we certainly are there to educate. We're there for people who just think that somewhere in their life they're going to encounter private equity, whether they work there or they work in a kind of surrounding organization, or maybe their company kind of comes into contact with private equity through an investor situation. So, we're excited to get members, we're excited to educate, and we're excited to learn from one another because all of our members have really great and interesting backgrounds that we can all learn from as well. So, we certainly have the career opportunities for those of you who are interested in going into private equity, but we also have plenty of educational opportunities and really interesting speakers if you're just trying to learn a little bit more about what is private equity. So I think that kind of covers our very brief overview on the club. We're seeing some questions roll in. If it seems appropriate, we can kind of just go towards those questions. I'm going to start with this first one from Konstantinos about examples of PE club events, because that's certainly something we enjoy talking about. So this semester already, we've had several events. Some of them are actually from employers who want to present to our members, and they are looking to teach our members about what the club can offer, about what their firm can offer, and also they're looking for potential candidates, whether for a full-time role or for a part-time role. So we had a speaker from Carlisle present to the club. We had a speaker from a search fund, which is also an area of great interest for MBA students. So those are kind of career type events. In terms of social events, we've had 2 outdoor socially distanced events this semester, which have been really great, a really good way for us all to get to spend time together, even though we're not necessarily meeting as regularly in person. Additionally, we've had education events. We've had 3 modeling seminars. So that's when we bring in an outside firm to teach a modeling seminar in terms of the 3-statement model as well as an LBO model. And those are very useful events for people to sign up for if you are looking to understand more about what private equity looks like, even for investment bankers, what a financial model looks like. So those are some of the events we've had in May. I don't know if you can think of some additional.
No, I think you covered them all. And the only thing I would add is we are trying to put together sort of a database of interview prep materials and trying to find ways to connect mentors who either have prior private equity experience or went through the summer recruiting process last year, typically second years, and match them with mentees, the first years, who would be going through at least the summer recruiting process now. So that's I guess less of an event, but just something that we are thinking of doing this year for the first time. And then one other thing that we are doing, which looks a little different this year, is historically we have had a London trek around Thanksgiving, where 12 to 15 of our members who are interested in careers in London would go to London and meet private equity firms there. This year, we're still capping it just to make sure that people who are going are truly interested in careers in Europe and in London, but we are going to do that virtually, and I think over Thanksgiving break.
And that actually segues very well into this question from Chuck Hay, Michael Toe about treks. So yes, we do traditionally have treks to London and Asia, Europe and Asia, and this year that will look very different because they are virtual. However, I think our board members are being very creative and flexible about this, and I think that there's a real opportunity to reach out to more firms because of this, because it used to be a logistical nightmare in many ways to navigate the traffic and all the subways or however you need to get across that city that you're visiting. So having it virtually gives us the opportunity to connect, I think, with a lot of different firms, but we do have those relationships in place, which is what's most important with firms in London and Asia. I can't speak specifically to Hong Kong, but certainly we've done treks in Asia, and that includes we've just recently expanded the capacity for treks. We're looking to India, looking to Singapore, and also a West Coast trek, because Columbia does traditionally have the most opportunities. So historically in the PE Club in New York City or the East Coast. So getting a West Coast trek, I think, has been something exciting as well for people looking to kind of move to California after graduation.
I I'm going to club a few of the questions that I think are sort of on a similar theme,
Great.
sort of an intersection between specific industries like real estate or healthcare or impact, if that's, I guess that's not an industry, but it's kind of a function, and PE or investing. So I think my advice on that would be, there's several clubs which may be able to help you when you get to Columbia in sort of meeting those goals. So for me, like I am interested in energy infrastructure. So I joined the Energy Infrastructure Club as well as the PE Club. And so I think if you're interested in healthcare, you should join the healthcare club. If you're interested in real estate association actually covers a lot of opportunities in development as well as investing. So that would be my advice, like make sure that you are sort of joining the clubs, professional clubs, which both pertain to the function that you're interested in. In this case, it would be private equity or investing, as well as like the industry. And that should like sort of help prepare you for like everything that you might see in interviews or your conversations, both in terms of like what's happening in the sector as well as what's happening in the world of PE. So that's sort of what I would advise on that.
That's awesome, and I agree. I think that was a great way to club. A lot of people have very specific interests, which is why you would join kind of two clubs, to get the industry expertise from one club and to get the private equity specific, more of the financial side from another. As a club, we've also worked to kind of host combined events. So if we got an interesting speaker who specifically is in, for example, healthcare or real estate private equity, we would invite the real estate club to co-host with us. So it's the biggest thing about being at Columbia is taking advantage of all these amazing speakers and clubs. So, joining as many as you want to, and then being aware of all these excellent speakers so you can actually attend the events that interest you and the opportunities that might work for you. Kind of clubbing another several questions I would say would be about recruiting. The thing, private equity is not, as you're learning more about Columbia, you'll hear a lot about on-campus recruiting, and then more off-campus or enterprise recruiting. And the difference being that there are certain careers, such as, for example, investment banking or consulting, where it's very structured and all of the interviews are quote unquote on campus. Who knows what that specifically looks like in virtual, but there's a much more formal timeline. Private equity is not one of those. So that's much more of an enterprise search, which means you're doing it a lot. It's a lot more of a self-starter approach. That's not to say that you don't have resources, you don't have support from Columbia, but it's certainly not, it's not, oh, all the applications are due on this date and all the interviews are in this date and you will get a job by this date. That's just not kind of how the private equity atmosphere works. In terms of the process, it certainly looks different for everyone. I would say a lot of people interested in going into private equity look into getting an in-semester internship. I know both Amay and myself have had them while we were at Columbia. That's one of the great things about Columbia, the ability to do that. So that's one way to kind of get your foot in the door. We, through the club, receive inbounds from employers all the time. Employers are constantly reaching out to us saying that they are interested in a candidate, whether again for a part-time in-semester internship or for a summer internship or for a post-graduation full-time internship. So really staying on top of that is important. In terms of timing, I'd say usually first semester, first year, it's not a time to be thinking necessarily about that, but starting in the winter and spring of your first year is when you would be doing a lot of outreach, trying to secure a summer internship. Maybe that spring you would do an in-semester internship as well. And then the second year fall is a great time again to do an in-semester internship. And I would say kind of all of second year is when you're just continuing the outreach and continuing to recruit and just looking for opportunities in the private equity world. Amay, I kind of just tried to crunch a lot of recruiting into one answer, but if you have any additional responses.
No, I think that was perfect. I think the only other thing I would add, and just to answer some of the questions that I'm seeing about career switchers or those of you who may not have PE background, on how A, the club prepares you for these interviews, and B, what kind of opportunities you see. So I think Julia mentioned this a little bit in her answer. I feel like a lot of people who do not have investing backgrounds, they try to get those during their time at Columbia by doing an in-semester internship. that like helps you learn some of the technical skills such as modeling, putting together investment decks, sourcing opportunities, and investments. Like you learn that in somewhat of a risk-free environment for the firm that's hiring you during your semester while you're still a student at Columbia. And that makes you a little bit more marketable for some of the full-time or summer opportunities. So that's one way. And the way the club supports that is, as Julia mentioned, we usually reach out to a lot of employers that have reached out to us in the past. We maintain sort of a database of the opportunities available, and we disseminate every opportunity that we get inbound to our members, like pretty much within the same day. So that's sort of how we support that. And on top of that, I think we were mentioning earlier, we have every semester we have 3 modeling trainings for three statement, short form LBO and long form LBO. And we also have starting this year sort of this database on interview prep materials, and hopefully we'll be able to match sort of mentors and mentees just to like help people prepare for their interviews better. So that's some of the ways that the club helps those of us who may not have sort of traditional PE background in getting those internships or full-time hours.
Additionally, I would say there are a lot of questions about, how many people have prior experience versus are kind of trying to career switch. I would say the majority of people are career switchers. Certainly, we have kind of a group that come from private equity background, including both MA and myself. A lot of the people who get immediately involved with the club are those who know that that's what they want because they are coming from that already. So you certainly have that, but I would say the majority of people are trying to get into private equity. And so we do cater a lot to that. And exactly as May said, one of the best ways to do that is through an in-semester internship. In terms of other resources, I'm seeing kind of other resources for career switchers and also classes on campus. We do have a private equity program on campus, and that involves that's actually an application-based class, but it's very open. It doesn't require a lot of prior knowledge. It's really about if it's something you're interested in learning more about. And through the private equity program, there is a class, Foundations of Private Equity. There are also, however, not related to the program, several classes that I've taken. Happy to go into those, but several classes on private equity emerging markets, or for example, someone mentioned they were interested in impact investing. I've taken a class investing in social ventures. There are lots of different angles you can take if you're interested in learning more in the classroom about private equity as well.
And just to add to that, I would also say Columbia has a fantastic sort of infrastructure in public market investing with the value investing program and all of that. So I actually found a couple of classes on the public side really helpful, just to round out the skill set that you have as a PE investor. So I took a class, for example, last semester called Applied Securities Analysis, which is centered around a Pershing Square challenge, which is a competition where you pitch a stock to Pershing Square, and the whole class basically helps you prepare that pitch. So I thought that class was great because many things that you do to come up with that pitch and identify sort of what where Pershing Square in this case would add value is also sort of useful to think about when you're doing an LBO pitch for some of your models and not some of your models, I'm sorry, some of your interviews that you might have with PE firms. So that's the only other thing I would add to what you said, Julia. And some other questions that we are seeing. One question is pretty quick answer. The annual PE competition. I think you might be thinking of the KKR competition that happens every sort of October, November. It's a great opportunity to. I would say two things. One, to just sort of form a team and sort of meet your other peers interested in private equity and sort of form those relationships early on in your first year. And the second is that it helps you create this LBO pitch that you can then use in your interviews that you do for the summer or full-time opportunities. So it's a great opportunity. Definitely, if you come to Columbia and you're looking to get into private equity in your first year, definitely do that competition. But I think starting this year, we are also trying to track other competitions that happen at our peer business school. So I know there was one last week at MIT Sloan, and we had 2 teams who participated in that competition. So, but those are sort of ad hoc based on when other schools are organizing them.
Absolutely. One thing that I was going to move to a little bit is just getting more questions on just a little bit more detail on how to take advantage of Columbia, the network, and kind of enact your own enterprise self-starter path. Specifically, I'm looking at Zachary's question, but I saw a lot kind of coming in like that. That is the benefit of the Columbia Network. And I really want to emphasize you're not alone. I know it sounds a little daunting, but that you're certainly not alone. From coming on campus the first day, my CMC advisor, was presenting me with certain resources. The private equity program, which we can also discuss a little bit more, the woman who runs that program, Professor Donna Hittrich, she is a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of connections. And then also through the CMC, you have access to the email addresses of at least 5 years worth of alums. So those are great people to reach out to. And even as you're being very specific. So as you're filtering it for example, for myself, I filtered for people who live in Colorado, people who work in private equity, and I came up with 8 or 15 people that I just emailed. And most of those people email you right back, as long as they're getting the right, because it's their alumni address. So as long as they're forwarding that to their actual email address that they're more actively checking, people are really eager to get back to you. People are really generous with their time. I would say that in terms of alums. I would also say that in terms of your fellow students, especially second years. In my first year, I certainly asked for 20 minutes of multiple second years time in terms of asking about whether one was curious about the company that they'd worked at, or their recruiting experience, or their timeline. So, I would look to current students, I would look to former students, I would look to the CMC, and then the private equity program. I think there are a lot of resources. I guess finally, another resource would just be the private equity club. That's what we're all here about. We're constantly, I can't emphasize enough, constantly sending out job opportunities. So, that I would encourage everyone who's a member of the club, who's interested, to apply to those job opportunities. Additionally, if you're not maybe ready to apply to those job opportunities, attending all of our speakers. Most of our speakers have some availability for an intern, even if they're not actively recruiting an intern. So, if you attend a speaker, if you follow up and write an email, they're often very excited to speak to you. And, it's all about, this enterprise recruiting is all about relationship building, and it's all about starting early, keeping dialogue open. You're not going to start with one fund and go straight with that single fund for the entire time. It is going to be a kind of fluid process, whether they have opportunities for you, whether you are interested in that opportunity. So you just have to make use of all of the various opportunities and resources at Columbia to kind of make that process work out for you.
And I just saw there a couple of questions similar to this, and asking about how going virtual has impacted PE recruiting. I actually personally don't see a big difference. So my first year process involved mostly reaching out to people, and I'll speak to the process itself because I saw there are a few questions here about the process. So I think what we advise people to do is, in your first couple of months, just get together a list of PE firms that you're interested in, and that might be a good match just given your background. So for example, if you worked in healthcare, maybe not in healthcare PE, but if you worked in healthcare, try to identify like healthcare PE firms which might value that background. So that's just one example, but like come up with a list of firms that you're interested in, and then just try to go on LinkedIn or on CBS Hub, which is a resource that CBS students have to look at alumni and where they are. And just first and second years at CBS who might have been in those in those firms, and just basically put together a list of firms, put together a list of contacts, first, second, third degree connections that might be working at those firms, and then just start reaching out. That's honestly like the most like foolproof method that I've found. Like I think it was a little exhaustive, and it was definitely exhausting, but I also thought that the connections that I formed through that process, like A, helped me get my summer internship, but B, now that I'm looking for full-time opportunities, that list has come up really handy. So that would be my advice. And in terms of like how going virtual has impacted it, I thought I was like reaching out to most people and just speaking with them over the phone. And I think that obviously hasn't changed that much. In fact, I think this year I've been seeing more people responding maybe a little bit quicker, and be that more willing to like get on Zoom or speak face to face, even though it's on the screen. So I think the willingness to do that has actually gone up a bit. So maybe there's obviously like uncertainty which might impact some other things, but I think in terms of just reaching out and getting those connections, I think that hasn't really been impacted due to the crisis.
Yeah, I mean, echoing MA, I would say if anything, it has become the world is becoming smaller, and people are just, those people who maybe were a little bit resistant to technology have been forced to figure it out. So, as we go back to in person, there will, I think, be a little bit of that remaining ease of communication, which is certainly great. I want to just address quickly, we're seeing a lot of questions about the private equity fellows and the private equity program. So just to clarify that, it used to be called Private Equity Fellows. It is now called the Private Equity Program. They are one and the same. It is an application-based program. It's not through the Private Equity Club. However, we work closely with Donna and Greta. Those are the two directors of the program. It is a great program, and as I mentioned, the program directs that class that I mentioned, Foundations of Private Equity, and it also hosts a weekly speaker series. And there's some really great speakers. That's really mostly Donna, drawing on her network, mostly CBS alums who work in private equity. It's a great way to, first of all, learn about private equity. Is that something you're at all interested in? But also make connections and actually actively begin that recruiting process. In terms of how the PE Club assists students in that program, I would say simply because there's a lot of overlap of the members of our club who are also in the program, as well as the resources. So, part of the PE program involves financial modeling. So, you should sign up for the private equity club modeling session, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of overlap there. Similarly, but not the same, the value investing program, that is a separate program. And in terms of the numbers, the students that are doing it from the private equity club, anecdotally, I would say fewer, simply because that is quite a time intensive program. And I would say that is a little bit more targeted towards people looking to work in hedge funds. I don't have that experience, but Amay, I don't know. Let me know if you feel differently there.
No, I agree with you, Julia. On the value investing program, I feel like there are definitely a few students who have PE experience and they're looking to transition into hedge funds or public market investing. I wouldn't say there are a lot of people in the BI program who are looking to do PE after they graduate from CBS.
Yeah, I would you can still take those classes.
Yep.
There are certainly, I want to take value investing. I think it sounds like a great class to take, but I'm not partaking in the value investing program. So, you can get the benefit of that course, and that there's some really great professors that if you want to learn from, but without necessarily doing the entire program, if that's not what you're looking for. A couple questions about kind of where a student would exit. Assuming you kind of did a little bit more of a traditional private equity track, every firm has different titles, so I can't necessarily speak to titles. However, I do think, for me at least, I'm looking to exit at a level above where I was prior to school. And I really do think that the firms, at least I'm speaking with, value the MBA experience, but it's also incumbent on us to emphasize not only I have the fundamentals, I know how to model and all of that, but what you've learned at business school and why business school actually has furthered your career. Why should I not just be a third-year associate? Why should I be a vice president, for example? And I think that's really a focus on leadership and communication skills. And it sounds those are more soft skills, but those are very important as you become more senior in a private equity firm, handling communication with the target company, handling workflows with all the third parties. Those are very important. And a lot of times the associate role is a little bit more head down, do the work, but the higher level roles are a lot more about communication and building consensus within the firm, and going to investment committee and presenting your ideas. So I think emphasizing to potential employers that is a skill that you've built in business school and that you've actually improved upon where you were prior to business school and the skills that you had there. I think that's really, at least what I'm trying to articulate to employers, as the real value add.
Going to club a couple of questions about the recruiting process again. One is the pre-MBA versus the post-MBA recruiting process. I would say some aspects of those are similar. I feel like you're still looking at taking a modeling test. You still should know your technicals cold. So in those aspects, I think the process is similar. But I think one place where it varies, and I think Julia was talking about that a little bit, is the emphasis on soft skills is a little bit higher, just because they're hiring you post MBA and they're looking to, if it's a small fund and if the position is sort of a partner track position, they want to make sure that you can sort of some of the softer aspects of the job, like you have what that takes. So that's I think the one sort of difference. And the other difference I would say is that this is a little bit less structured. So while, like, if you were in investment banking or consulting and you went through a very structured process with sort of headhunters into the pre-MBA associate roles, this one you would see has a little bit less of a structure, and it's a little bit more sort of opportunities to source yourself through the connections that you've formed or through the in-semester internships that you've done. So it might look completely different. For example, you might end up in your full-time role post-MBA from an in-semester internship that you did in your time at Columbia. So it just doesn't look as structured as sort of the pre-MBA associate process. And the other question that I saw about recruiting, I don't see it anymore.
Oh, sorry, May, I've been sorting them, so maybe I'm messing up your flow.
No, you're totally fine. You're totally fine. I just saw it again. So I think it just talks about sort of the difference between the boutique or middle market PE shops versus mega funds. And I think the only, and I think this, Dharani, I think you answered your question basically, because mega funds are just more structured. So while some of the smaller shops, they might, they might be hiring more ad hoc, they only probably hire when they have a need, given that the teams on these middle market or boutique shops are much smaller. And so one thing I would say is, like, when you're looking for firms which may hire in your year, go a couple of years back, because, like, one mistake that people do is like, hey, they hired someone in 2019, so they're probably going to hire someone in 2020. Well, it's actually less likely that they'll hire someone in 2020 if they hired someone in 2019, just given how small these firms are and how low attrition is. But in mega funds, I think that's a little bit more structured and reliable. Like, if you're looking to go to someone like Blackstone, they almost always advertise for senior associates every year. Then of course it's a very competitive role, and they're probably looking to take 1 or 2 or 3 senior associates from like all business schools combined. So they're competitive, but very structured and very sort of predictable in a way. So that's sort of the difference that I would say.
I think that's a great point, Amay. And I would also say, in terms of a difference, but depending on your background, I think people going to those mega funds, you have to have that more traditional background. There's really no wiggle room there. And so if that's not you, that's when it really makes a lot of sense to look to these smaller firms, these growing firms. They can be a lot more flexible in what they're looking for. They are a lot more confident in their ability to train you. So I think that's a difference in your background. And if you have a little bit more of a different background or a non-traditional background, that's a really great way to get your foot in the door through one of the smaller firms that is looking at this ad hoc basis, and probably because they're growing. Another question from Shamal is about kind of different roles, so operations versus deal team. And I'm glad you asked, because a big portion, there are so many roles beyond investing roles, and we have club members go into all sorts of roles. And that's really been a focus actually of our club this year, to really expand the world of the possible. So we certainly see a lot of people go into investing roles. We are seeing a growing emphasis on operations roles, specifically if you have experience, as Amay gave an example, if you have experience in healthcare or real estate, that could be a really great fit for a firm that is operationally focused in healthcare or real estate. Similarly, we're seeing people go into roles in investor relations. So that's an area where it requires financial know-how and knowledge, but it's a little bit less heavy on the modeling aspect, or the real what you would think goes into the investing role. So there are lots of roles beyond the typical investment professional role within private equity firms that we encourage our members to look at, specifically members with different backgrounds that could be really valuable to those firms.
One question that I'm reading is about student-run funds at Columbia, and I think the one that you're thinking of is Microlumbia, which is essentially, so you're right, you do apply to be a part of Microlumbia as a first year, and I think I don't think that has any sort of criteria of like prior investment experience or anything like that, but they do have controls over like where the funds go. So if you do make it to part of Microlumbia, so I think I'm not a part of Microlumbia, so I don't know whether Julia you are, but my understanding of Microlumbia is that you basically apply to be in Microlumbia, and then you it's essentially private investing in companies which have a social impact. So it's kind of like impact investing, but you're also looking for a certain financial return. So you basically source those investments, you make your case, and I think there's some kind of a investment committee within Columbia which sort of like adjudicates like whether that's a good investment or not. But that's my understanding. I'm not a part of Microlumbia, but if you're looking at that, like, just make sure you reach out to someone at Microlumbia and they'll be able to tell you more.
I would also say this is tangential, but also interesting. There are a lot of ways to access Columbia money and give it away. Or I'm interested in impact investing. I think it's a really great area. And I've been in two classes where the classes had independent money to give to applicants. So in one class, it was, you spent the whole class kind of doing an investment analysis on all these nonprofit startups. And at the end, you got to recommend them for a grant or not, depending on their qualifications. And then in another class I'm taking now, you have $25,000 and you get to decide which nonprofit it goes to. So there are a lot of ways, and I'm sure there are so many more, to access these pockets of money that are dedicated to very specific things if you're interested in kind of learning about being an investor and getting that hands-on experience. I think a good question, and this kind of ties into a couple, is about recruiting while trying to change geography. We're also looking at, I saw a question about kind of people networking and foreign students hoping to work in their home country. So we can kind of put those together a little bit. In terms of trying to change geography, in some ways, it depends where you're coming from. It depends where you're trying to go. I'll start with that. For example, coming from a background on the East Coast and trying to go to Colorado, can be difficult because there are fewer firms in Colorado. However, I think my background is uniquely valued in Colorado, whereas in New York or Boston, where I was working before, there are a lot more candidates that look like me. And by look like me, I mean I had similar background, similar investment experience, similar career experience. So depending on how that shift looks to you, or if you're trying to move to New York, that's going to be more competitive. There are just areas that are more and less competitive. However, I would also say, especially again, focusing on if you're looking for a job outside of New York and you find any Columbia grads who also are in that geography, they are so excited to have you. So they are even more eager to make that connection and to speak with you and to help you out. I've spoken to several Columbia grads living in Colorado who they've said first thing first, we don't have a space, but I'd love to talk with you for 30 minutes and help you go through the landscape in Colorado. They're so generous with their time. So I think looking to switch geographies can be a real benefit and can almost be a competitive advantage if you're in the right geography. In terms of people looking to work PE in their home countries, this has been something we've actually added emphasis on this year in the Private Equity Club. We have a position kind of called the International VP, and that's actually a team that is working actively to both look at roles that are available in other countries that would be recruiting CBS students, but also a kind of a common need or something that a lot of students are looking for is roles in the US that would sponsor students. So I'm not the expert in that. You may have a little bit more experience there, but we're constantly looking to kind of help our members who are looking to recruit elsewhere or who need to be sponsored.
Yeah. I think you hit most of the points, Julia. The only thing I would add is, like, if you are interested in one of the geographies that we do cover in our tracks, definitely go on the tracks, because like if we see those firms, they have a track record of hiring CBS students, and you might actually meet some CBS alums who are at those firms, and if you form a relationship there, they might actively try to help you. So definitely go on those tracks. If you are looking at a geography which may not be covered by a track, so let's say you are interested in LATAM, but we don't really have a defined LATAM track, I would still say the process remains roughly the same. You still want to have a list of target firms, try to find contacts. You'll be surprised how many CBS alums you find everywhere. So and then reach out to them, and we actually do have like some, as Julia mentioned, an international team as well as a LATAM team, which try to find opportunities in these geographies, even where we don't have tracks, and just like sort of make sure that we have a database of those opportunities for students who are interested. It is a little bit more bespoke. It's not if you're looking for opportunities in New York or London or Hong Kong, just geographies where there are just more opportunities concentrated in these geographies. Any other geography is going to be more bespoke, and you might have to do a little bit more work in just finding those connections. But in terms of like helping you prep for the recruiting, whether it's like modeling training or interview prep, or whether it is to like walk you through the process, like that's where the PE Club can really help you.
We have 5 minutes, as Jordan mentioned. So, quickly, I think we've sort of hit on this, but just wanted to kind of reiterate that you don't need investment banking experience to be successful in recruiting. It is, I will say, however, I want to be clear, it is harder. The firms generally just want to know that you know kind of a basis of financial knowledge, and they use a proxy for that. They just call it investment banking, and whether that's correct or fair, I'm not going to comment on, but it is certainly more common. That is not to say that you cannot do it. And the number one way to do it, if you don't have that experience, is through in-semester internships at these smaller firms who are a lot more nimble and a lot more flexible and are able to kind of give you the support that you need. So you certainly can be successful. It is going to be much more, as I mentioned, much more of an enterprise process. You really need to also, you need to teach yourself if you don't know that modeling. Sign up for the modeling sessions, really immerse yourself in Corp Fin, all of those classes that are really going to help you there. I think that, I'm happy to answer a question about how to get involved or become an officer. Classes, we have a club fair that kicks off kind of in the first couple of weeks of your first year. Certainly attend, and then it's an open application process. We have a very large board, so there are a lot of opportunities to be a leader if that's something you're looking to do. It's really about having creative ideas, reaching out to members on the board. We're really open to a lot of new positions. If you have, we recently introduced a VP of EMBA because we have a lot of EMBA members who are looking to get involved. We introduced the West Coast Trek. We're introduced a LATAM team. We're really flexible and we're really excited. If you have an idea, we want to take it somewhere. So lots of ways to get involved. We also have a J-term role. So there is the ability we specifically have a VP of J-term, but then also once you get into your second year, you could apply to be, we have an AVP of J-term, and then we take on plenty of J-termers and regular roles as well. I think a good way to end MA is maybe a couple classes that have been really interesting or helpful to us.
Yeah, so I think that's a great way to end. And I think I would call out maybe 2 or 3. So out of forecasting, it's Professor Ellen Carr. She, again, her background's on the public market side, but the class focuses on how to think very intentionally and deliberately about modeling. So I thought that was a fantastic class. I learned a lot, even though I thought that I knew modeling really well. Applied securities analysis that I already mentioned. And then one class that I haven't taken, but I intend to take next semester is economics of strategic behavior, which is not a finance class, but it's a strategy class that a lot of people in the PE club have talked about, that class helping them become better strategic PE investors.
Awesome. For myself, I would say I took private equity and emerging markets, which was a great class. Really loved the professor, and that's Professor Marco Viola. And it's really not just about emerging markets. He talks about his experience in emerging markets. He talks about his experience investing in the US. He's a great resource. He brought in some really great guest speakers from private equity firms in his network. So that was a great class. Additionally, I would say a class that I took that was a little bit non-private equity focused, but really helpful, was the class on sales. It was called Growing the Sales Machine. And that was really valuable to me because a lot of the firms, at least in my experience, that we've tried to invest in have been companies with failing sales teams. So learning about how to appropriately incentivize and grow a sales team, I thought would be really valuable to me. We are right up on time. Please feel free to email us. You see our email address there. Also, you can email us directly. It's going to be from jdeen21@gsb.columbia.edu. Same and for May.
asapray21@gsb.
Super happy to talk to all of you. I'm glad you came. And please let us know if you have any questions.